Today on the show, we are talking about stories, and we're talking about the power that they have to influence us to buy a product or service. And I have to laugh because we literally just experienced this in action. The other day, PJ, my partner, randomly bought dog teeth cleaning wipes for our Wheaten Terrier, Kona. You know, the ones that go around your little finger like a glove and you just get your finger in there and clean their teeth? Well, PJ had no previous plans to buy this. He wasn't planning it. Our dog's dental hygiene was not top of mind that day. But we'd just gotten off a call with our team, and he heard 3 different people on our team telling their stories of the total chaos it is trying to brush a pet's teeth. Of toothpaste ending up everywhere, the dog bolting under the bed, the cat scratches, and the desperate attempts at bribing the pet with peanut butter. It was those stories that made us all go, yep, that's us. It made us laugh. And then PJ went and bought the product that we were just talking about. Now, my point here is that stories, no matter how silly or trivial or small, they sell. And stories sell better than statistics, better than your product design, better than anything. Because we are humans and we connect on that emotional level. Whatever that emotion may be, we see ourselves in another when we hear a story. So today, let's talk about how you can use your stories to sell more, reach more people, and connect more authentically with your ideal clients. Welcome to another episode of the Her Business Podcast. I'm Susie, I'm the CEO at Her Business, and I am your host. Now, I love a good statistic, conversion rates, revenue numbers, engagement figures. We track them, we talk about them, we use them in our marketing all the time because they feel credible and tangible and real. But statistics alone, they don't sell, not really. What sells is emotion. What sells is the moment that someone sees themselves in your offer. What sells is hope. Hope for change, hope for transformation, hope that whatever they're going through right now doesn't have to stay that way forever. So in this episode, I want to talk about the soul of effective marketing, and that's storytelling. And not just any storytelling, we're talking about the kind of story that makes someone stop scrolling, stop overthinking, and say, yes, I need that. So let's dive into why stories sell better than statistics and how to mine stories, M-I-N-E, stories from your everyday life, even if you think you don't have anything relevant to share that isn't oversharing. And how you can use stories at every stage of the customer journey without needing to spill your guts. So let's get onto it. So why do stories work better than statistics when it comes to someone actually buying your product or service? And I don't just mean statistics. Why do stories work better than facts and features and even benefits? Now, statistics are processed in the analytical part of the brain, the part called the neocortex. Don't worry, I'm not going to go all biology on you. But here's what I want you to know is that stories activate a different system, the limbic system, which is all about emotions, memories, and most importantly, this is key, decision-making. In other words, statistics give us information, stories give us a feeling. Now, you could turn your TV on right now and see examples of storytelling in marketing. So it wasn't hard to find examples of this for me to share with you. So there's an organisation called water.org, and they use storytelling perfectly in their marketing. You may have heard of them, but if you haven't, they're a not-for-profit organisation, as you may have guessed, and they're dedicated to educating people about the global water crisis. Now, they could say that 771 million people around the globe lack access to clean water. Now, that would be effective because it's a shocking statistic, but it's almost too big for us to get our head around. It's too grand a scale. We can't even conceptualize that many people. But what can we conceptualize? We can conceptualize individuals, families, and they have an entire campaign that's dedicated to sharing the stories of the people they help empower. So while you're trying to imagine 771 million people on one hand, kind of this faceless crowd, they have now introduced you to a little girl who has to walk 3 hours a day to collect water from a contaminated river. You hear her talking about her life and that she walks for miles. You see her daily struggles, you see her perseverance and her strength, and you see yourself, you see your child, you see another human being there. That story instantly humanizes the global water crisis. You picture that little girl, you feel for her, you want to help her. That is the power of a story. And this isn't something that just charities and NGOs use. Think of Nike. How often do you see a Nike ad about shoe specs, about the fabric used or their innovative lace technology, if that's even a thing? You don't hear that. Instead, they show stories of athletes overcoming the odds, of women feeling empowered and strong, of people who didn't make the team but trained anyway, waking up early, running in the rain, and finally crossing that finish line. Oh, the finish line. That's a story I'm hoping to share when I complete the marathon I'm training for right now. We care about the people, the story, not the damn shoelaces. We care about the humans. And there are so many examples. One of my favorite brands, Apple. Think of Apple. They're not just selling you a laptop, are they? They're selling you the lifestyle of a creator, an innovator, a person who has their life together, a person who has taste. They aren't putting the RAM or battery life center stage when they're promoting. You can find that in the fine print. They focus on the storytelling. The filmmaker editing from a cafe in Paris, the student designing some passion project, the entrepreneur building their business from their kitchen table. Airbnb is another brand that has nailed storytelling in its ads. YouTube highlights the stories of successful creators. Coca-Cola paints stories of humans drinking its product. I'm not a fan, but drinking its product while having fun. I could go on and on. Stories cut through the noise. Stories go where our logic just cannot. They lower the buyer's defenses. So you're not pushing your stuff in front of people, you're connecting. You're not shouting, hey, buy my thing right now. You're saying, hey, look at what is possible for you. And as the wonderful Dr. Robert Cialdini talks about in his book Influence, we are all deeply influenced by social proof, the idea that if other people like us are doing something, it must be the right thing to do. It must also possibly be possible for us. Now, by the way, if you want an episode all about Cialdini's principles and the psychology of persuasion as it relates to marketing, I'm going to link to one of our recent episodes in the show notes. It's a really, really good listen. Now, we are influenced most when we relate to the people in the story. Sounds kind of obvious, right? That's why a story about someone like us is so powerful. What does that look like in your business? What stories would resonate with your ideal client? Maybe it's a woman struggling with menopause, or a parent with a child that has ADHD, or a business entrepreneur that is juggling too much, or even someone who's sick of looking at their messy backyard, or that senior manager who just can't get their team to meet their KPIs. We want to know, did someone like me get results? Because if they did, maybe I could too. And maybe you are the key to those results for me. Now, if the goal here is trust, you might be thinking, wait, there are plenty of ways to gain trust with your potential clients. Testimonials, credibility banners, your branding, all of that comes into play. But nothing quite builds trust like a story. Because stories humanize your brand, no matter what you sell. They say, I'm just another human who's dealt with the same problem as you. And this is what helped me. And we want to do business with people who get it, who get us, who get our problems. And when you share a story, even a tiny one, you create that connection, that, oh, that's me too kind of moment. The moment when your listener or your reader goes, oh, that is exactly how I feel. Now, does this mean that you need to chronicle your life in every marketing email? No, it doesn't. Anything can be a story, even the smallest moments. Maybe you felt odd because you couldn't figure out a tech tool, or maybe your cat walked across your laptop, sending a no-nonsense message to a client by accident, or maybe you did a little dance in your living room after your first online sale. Those human moments are the bridge between you and your audience. Now compare the stories, even the tiny way in which I just told them, with a long list of features or a testimonial that has no context. Stories, good stories, make people feel, and people buy when they feel something. I remember we had an events company, and one of the things I noticed is that the events on which we sold the most merchandise were with the events where people either cried more or laughed more. They felt something or were outraged. So the more feeling that the speaker evoked, the more we sold. It was kind of crazy, but it was never done deliberately. It was just something we noticed. So then we would say, make them laugh. Just make them laugh and they'll buy. And remember, that decision-making part of the brain is the same part that rules emotions. Someone who does this really, really well is the beloved Brené Brown, a researcher and storyteller who's spent decades studying courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy. And if you're listening here, you may have heard of her because I've probably likely mentioned her before. But also she's like hugely known. She's got a huge following. But just in case you don't know her, her name is Brené Brown, and she's got a really stellar TED Talk, and I'm going to link to her in the show notes. She has amazing books. Now, she doesn't just talk about the research that she's done on courage or vulnerability or shame or empathy. She tells stories, and she is a master storyteller. Stories about sitting in her car eating peanut butter straight from the jar. Stories about family, about friends, about weird little life moments. Stories about her shame or vulnerability or courage or literally any human emotion. And in doing this, in sharing these bits and pieces of vulnerability, she makes you trust her, love her, want to be close to her. Not because she's an expert in everything or exceptional in everything, but because she's so damn human. And I'm just rolling with these examples as they come to me because there are so many. I mentioned Airbnb earlier. Their massive global success isn't built on showing how many listings they have. It's not about shouting about the trips booked or the ease of their app. All interesting things, those features matter. Their marketing is built on storytelling. You see them featuring the 80-year-old grandma in Italy hosting 20-somethings from all over the world because her children have moved away. A long time ago now. You hear about a woman who hosted a family in her spare room after her husband passed away. You witness as a couple staying in a treehouse reconnects with one another. Oh, I've got goosebumps. These are the moments that stick, that build connection, that build trust. You think, how nice would it be to chat with Nonna over a glass of wine in the Italian countryside? Maybe I should book a trip and see what adventures I can get up to. Actually, as an aside and a little story, I'm going to Italy later this year, and so I've been using Duolingo, the app, to learn Italian, which is fun, and I'm up to page 140-something, day 140-something. So I've got a long way to go to be actually able to have a conversation with Nonna, but I can definitely say some words. I can enjoy that glass of wine with her for sure. So you've been listening to me talk about stories for a while now, so if I was to read your mind, I'm going to guess that you want to incorporate some stories into your marketing. Maybe you don't want to, but maybe you're thinking, oh, well, maybe I could. Maybe there's a possibility for me. Maybe I understand that, yes, it would make a difference and allow me to connect with my ideal clients. But who wants to put their personal details out there? Who wants the internet to know our embarrassing stories and vulnerable moments? I'm on your side. I don't care to put intimate details out there. I believe that some things can just be mine to know and not used for marketing. But the great news is that you can retain your privacy and still use storytelling. You can share a story without sharing everything. Now, this took me a while to figure out, and it's still something I'm learning. I used to think, who really cares about my story or what I've overcome? But here's what I've learned, is that people don't just want to see the result or a product or service. They want to know that that result is possible for someone like them. And that is what stories do. They put us right in the shoes of our audience and allow our audience to see that we have been in their shoes and we made it out. We made it out through whatever this dark place was, this difficult place, this challenging place. Now, you don't have to say I was $60,000 in debt and my marriage was falling apart. You could, but you don't have to. You could say there was a time where I felt stuck, exhausted. I have no idea if my business would ever work, but I found a way through, and that's how I help others do that now. So you didn't reveal your financial information. You didn't add any details about family members who may not want to be mentioned in your marketing, but you're still sharing with emotion and the transformation that's available for your ideal client. Just haven't given them every little gritty detail. But if you're comfortable doing that, absolutely go for it. Sometimes you don't need to share all the details. But when you give someone a base, a feeling, a hook, a glimpse of you, that leaves room for them to project their own experience onto it. That's powerful storytelling. That's using strategic vulnerability. So how do you gather these moments? How do you mine your life stories for these moments that you can and want to share? What do you do if you don't have some Hollywood backstory that could be turned into a feature film? That's most of us. What if you're a regular person without any blockbuster-worthy stories to tell? Well, I can tell you most of us don't have that sort of story, but you have stories to tell. It's a matter of starting to pay attention. I sometimes like to think of it as being a bit of a story archaeologist, like mining and digging around in my own life, my day, my week, looking for these little golden moments that might have someone go, yeah, I get it, I've been there. And as a business owner who works with business owners, trust me, there are a lot of moments that you can relate to. And that's why I try to share them. And where I'm sharing them mostly these days is over on Instagram. But they appear in our emails, they appear in our webinars, they appear on our blog posts, they appear in our newsletters. And you have stories to tell because anything can be a story, really anything. Going for a run on the weekend, even though you didn't feel like it, is a story about consistency. Forgetting your Zoom password before a big pitch, that's vulnerability. Getting your first 5-star review and doing a happy dance in your kitchen, that is celebration. We can all relate to that. The key to making anything a story is to find two things, the emotion and the lesson. And I think that's where some people get this screwed up. They share all the emotion and the vulnerability, and it's like, well, how is that relevant for me? So ask yourself, what happened? How did I feel? And go deep in that. What was the takeaway? What is it that I can share? If you haven't heard of Brendan Stanton, he's an incredible creator. He created a project called Humans of New York. He's a writer, he's a photographer, and his photos are gorgeous. There is artistry there for sure, but it's the stories that he tells about everyday people in New York that have made his project explode. I had the wonderful opportunity to see him live giving a presentation probably about 8 years ago now. So his work has been around for a while, but I encourage you to check it out. It's called Humans of New York. And he has people opening up about grief, love, ambition, failure, the whole spectrum of emotion. Stories that share the emotions that we've all had throughout our lives. We may not relate to that very specific loss or grief that person is sharing in his stories, but a part of us totally understands that. We've been there in our own shame, in our own grief, in our own love, in our own ecstasy. And you can't help but feel connected to the people whose stories he's telling instantly, even if they live a completely different life. Because when I say that people want to hear stories from people like them, I don't mean physicality in any way. That connection, that relatability isn't formed because of how similar that person looks to you, but it could be that, right? I might be a young mum of infants. Yeah, so maybe you look like me, but it's about how similar your experiences are, how similar the emotions of self-doubt or sadness or anger or love are. That's what people are looking for pretty much every day, online, offline, in our connections. We're all subconsciously on the hunt for connection, to feel understood, to understand. So when we go to a coffee shop and we ask the barista, what would you recommend? Or when we give a passing stranger that awkward smile that you know we sometimes do, or when you're coming down from a hike and you say to the person coming up, the view's worth it. We're not solitary creatures. We're constantly looking for ways to connect, to ease interactions, to feel seen, to see others. And that's what you can do with your clients as well. And we can do that best with stories. And if you're struggling with this idea of mining for stories, I get it. It's something I've tried to get better at. And I've noticed that keeping a little story bank helps me. I know it sounds a bit silly, but as you go, you start noticing the little things that happen in your day that are funny, relatable, emotion-filled, that you may have taken a quick photo of. Just open up your notes app, or your photos, or a journal, and have a look at things that made you laugh or cry or think or feel embarrassed or grow. It might be a sign outside of a store. It could be a child sitting on a park bench. It could be a puppy that just grabbed your heart. It could be the view on your Sunday run. You don't need to use all these stories right away. You don't have to use them ever, in fact, if you decide something is too vulnerable or detailed, but you can have this little bank of snippets of life when you need them. And if you're really stuck, ask yourself, when was a moment this week where I felt something? Annoyed at the dog waking me up too early. That's happened. Opening a spontaneous gift from a friend or a client, talking to someone you haven't spoken to in a while, watching a stranger do something kind. That is where the gold is. So you have stories. But what do you do with them? That's where a lot of people get stuck. Because how do you use stories? Where do you tell them? Are you supposed to just write a lengthy email painting out your weird interaction with the deli counter person in the supermarket, concluding, oh, that's my story, bye? No, not necessarily. Although I would probably read that email, to be fair. I love a good deli visit. But not every story fits every platform. Not every story fits every marketing asset you have or every opportunity. So let's break it down into a few different things. Let's say social media. This is where people are usually coming into your world. They're at the attraction part of the buyer's journey. So this is where potential leads are first seeing you, they're hearing from you or reading what you're writing. People aren't scrolling Instagram necessarily to read a soliloquy. On social media, your stories would ideally lean slightly on the shorter side, but ideally they're very relatable. Now, think quick stories and outcomes like the time you sent an email to the wrong person, or you shared a photo of your messy desk and what it really looks like to run a business, a treat you got yourself after a client win. You're going for stories that spark curiosity from people who might not know you, and you start to relate to them. They get to see, oh yeah, I've got the messy desk. Yeah, I sent an email to the wrong list, a couple of weeks ago. I forgot to put in a subject line, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It just needs to be relatable. Now, your email sequences compared to social media, they can go a little deeper. And I know I've certainly told longer stories, challenges I faced, something new I tried, some result I got. And you can do the same. Build the trust, stay authentic. If you're a funny person, let us see that. If you're a deep person, get deep. If you're a tell it like it is person, tell it like it is. If you want your readers to view you as a real human person, you want to inject you into your storytelling. It's almost impossible to not love someone, to not have an affinity for them when they are being authentically themselves. This is true. I get it. It's not easy. But we can always sniff out when someone's not being 100% themselves, when there isn't 100% authenticity. And I know it can be scary to show yourself in this way. That's why you want to let your stories do the telling. So you can also use your client stories because your readers want proof that it's not just you who can achieve whatever outcome you offer. It's telling the stories of your clients. I love telling stories of our clients. There are so many stories, and we gather them, we have them in files, they're ready to go when we need them to demonstrate different things, different scenarios, different types of women in business that we're helping, different revenue types, different business models, different products and services, different challenges. Okay, so real human, using long form like email, you can go deeper into stories. Now, let's talk about a sales page or a website. Now, this is where your story has a distinct job to do. It needs to connect the dots. Why you? Why this offer? Why the transformation that your client wants? This is where many people use the hero's journey structure. I'll put a link to it, but look it up. It's a common narrative archetype. It's a story template that describes a hero's adventure, the trials and eventual transformation that someone has on their journey. As I said, I'll put a link to it because this is a great way to tell a story. It starts with what the challenge is and how the person turns it around. You'll see it in every movie, in every good book, etc. But that's the hero's journey. Or you can use what's called the BAB structure. Show the before, then the after, then explaining the bridge. That's the BAB, right? The bridge is your product or service. Here's where I was before, here's where I am now, and here is the bridge. Okay, there's a couple of structures you can use. And here you share the why behind what you do and you highlight the successes. You share testimonials, screenshots, highlights. And if you're looking for a brilliant resource to improve your storytelling technique, then you want to check out a book called Power Stories by my good friend Valerie Khoo, Khoo. Again, I'll put a link to that. Now, she outlines 8 different types of stories that you can use in your business, including the story to tell on your About page, the story to build credibility, the story that attracts your dream clients, your founder's story. I've given this book to hundreds of people over the years. It's that good. So that's Power Stories by Valerie Khoo. Now, finally, I want to talk about other people's stories because sometimes we forget we don't always have to be the star of the story. And in fact, it kind of takes the pressure off you. So think about this podcast episode. I've told you dozens of stories in this, 20 minutes? How many of them have been about me? A couple have been, but I use stories of other businesses, of thought leaders, of brands, of members to drive the point home. And why is that? Because if I only fill this episode with my anecdotal evidence, it would not be as credible, right? Maybe if you've been following the podcast for a long time, you'd stick around and listen to me talk about my life. But what adds credibility is the other stories that I'm sharing, the stories of how stories worked for other people. So use your client stories, case studies, screenshots, reviews. They're all stories that sell. And sometimes they do it more powerfully and effectively than even our own stories. But I don't want you to stop from starting to collect the stories, looking at your journal, looking at the photos you're taking, stopping and saying, that's kind of funny what just happened at that line at Coles, the supermarket. I can really relate to that. I'll often find stories, especially when I'm relaxed and I'm traveling, they seem to flow more because there's no pressure to tell a story, but I notice that my storytelling gets better when I'm away from my desk, if you like. I'm not trying to come up with a story. So I'm going to give you a resource on collecting client stories. I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But remember, in your stories, you want to talk about before, what challenge someone was facing, if you're telling someone else's story or your own, what life was like, the after, what life looks like after the change, and how did it feel? Were they relieved? Were they excited? Were they inspired? And if you're launching something new, a new product or service, and you don't have case studies or testimonials, that's okay. You can totally get around that. You can share past wins from similar offers. You can use stories from past clients who had a similar journey or an outcome to what your offer will give. I'll just share your own personal stories that relate to your service. There have been times when we've launched a new workshop or a new course, or we didn't have stories about that particular workshop or retreat, but we've got plenty of transformation stories from other similar events, and you can totally use those as long as you clarify where they're from. It's all above board and all cool. And, if you've worked with one client, you have a story. If you worked with dozens of clients, you have a dozen stories, etc., etc. So here's what I want you to take away from today. One, you don't need to be a novelist or great story writer to inject stories into your marketing. You don't need to overshare the details of your personal life or ever feel like you're being more vulnerable than you want to be. And you certainly don't need to make stories up. You just want to be real, because real is what people are looking for, especially right now when so much content out there is the opposite of real. You know what I'm talking about. Remember that being human sells, emotions sell, stories sell, and they might just be your most powerful marketing asset. I'd love for you to take what we've talked about today and put it into practice. So grab a journal, pull up your notes app, and mine for 3 stories from the past week. As I said, you could even look in your Photos app. Again, these don't need to be chronicles of how you started your business, just little anecdotes that are truly and uniquely human and yours. So write them down, then pick one that you are comfortable sharing. So for me, 2 stories, recent stories that come to mind that I could share are, I was recently invited to speak on a panel about confidence. And guess what? I went in feeling not confident. So I had to dig in and think about, well, what gives me confidence? And there was 5 things that give me confidence, and that's what I shared on the panel. And I told them the story. The other story that's recent for me is I ran in the rain the other day, and it was super hard to get out the door. But I put my shoes on and I left the house. So sometimes it's just taking the first steps, just tying your shoes up and getting out the door that get us unstuck, that move us on from a situation. So they're 2 little stories, super easy, very relatable. We've all not felt confident. We've all had to take that first step to get ourselves out of the door, whatever that equivalent is for us. So you can relate. And so what are your stories from the last week? Pick a story and share it. Use it in an email. Tell it at your next workshop or event. Put it in a caption in your next Instagram post, whatever fits for whatever your goals are. And you know what? I would love to know what your story is. And you can find me on Instagram. You can DM me. I have a personal account, but where you really want to go is @herbusiness. That's my business account. And I respond to every note there. So feel free to share with me. Because here's the thing. Your ideal clients, they're not just buying a product or service, they're buying a possibility. And the story you tell could be the one that finally helps them believe that it's possible for them too, and that you are the person who can have them have that possibility. You've got stories all around you. Your whole life is a story. So just start telling them, and I will do the same, I promise. And speaking of stories, There's a story I want to tell you here. Naturopath Amanda Trieger listened to a recent episode and she said this. She said, so excited to find a great podcast to connect in with supporting women. Well, thank you, Amanda. Welcome to the show. Thank you for your comment. Congratulations on the work that you're doing, helping women align their work with their natural flow and their feminine timeline. That is the work you do. We're going to put a link to Amanda's website in our show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it. It would be a huge thank you to me if you would leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. Or you can shoot me a message at podcast@herbusiness.com or leave a message, on Instagram, as I mentioned. Just let us know. Let us know you enjoyed this episode. Now, over at herbusiness.com/304, you're going to find a summary of today's episode and links to the resources we discussed, including any other episodes or good companions that we've talked about here today. I also said that I would give you a resource so that you can share stories. We have a resource called 6 Questions to Ask for Terrific Testimonials. This is a way to get your client stories. And what we're going to do on the show notes page at herbusiness.com/304, we're going to put a link to that resource that you can download, right now for free. Now, if you are new to the show, welcome. Be sure to subscribe, hit follow, listen, subscribe, whatever app you're on, however they do it there. And join me for the next episode of the Her Business Podcast. We've got great interviews coming up, lots of inspiring stories and lessons from successful female entrepreneurs. I'll see you next week right here on the Her Business Podcast. Bye for now.